Hey guys, tonight we're heading far, far back past the glow of city lights, past the hum of the modern world, into the dusty hills of Iron Age Judea. You open your eyes to a world of ochre earth and pale sky, a place where the air smells of wood smoke, sheep, and baking bread. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a rooster crows. A donkey brays in response. You pull your rough wool cloak tighter and take your first step into a day that happened nearly 3,000 years ago. It's early morning, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. You can almost hear time creaking awake. Before you, a cluster of stone houses clings to the hillside, the walls built from unshaped rock and mud plaster. The roofs are flat thatched with straw and brush. The sun, yes, that same relentless Mediterranean sun, is just beginning to spill over the hills of Judea, gilding everything with the softest, most deceptive gold. Beautiful, yes, but also brutally honest. You probably wouldn't survive this world for more than a few days. No Wi-Fi, no coffee, and not a single air conditioner in sight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the texture under your sandals, the crunch of gravel, the soft drift of powdered dust. A goat bleats lazily somewhere, and the faint clang of metal hints that someone's already at work. In this small village, dawn means survival. Everyone has a task from fetching water to grinding grain. You make your way toward a low doorway, ducking inside. The room smells like earth and ash and something warm baking on clay. A woman sits near a small hearth, coaxing a fire from olive wood twigs. Her hands move with the rhythm of habit flip press. Wait, breathe. She's making flatbread, maybe barley or emmer wheat, the grains most common in Iron Age Judea, the same kind archaeologists later find in charred fragments beneath ancient floors. You watch as she scrapes the dough from her fingers, slaps it onto a heated stone, and smiles faintly when it bubbles. Historians still argue whether this bread was leavened or not. Some say yeast was a luxury reserved for feasts or temple offerings. Others think every household kept a secret starter, a quiet culture living on in each loaf. Either way, the smell is intoxicating, warm, nutty, and somehow both humble and sacred. You crouch beside the hearth and feel the heat lick your knees. The woman doesn't speak your language, but her gestures are clear. She offers you a small piece, nodding for you to eat. You take a bite, and it's smoky, dense, faintly sweet. This is the taste of survival, the daily bread mentioned in prayers and psalms. Beyond the house, the village begins to stir. A boy drives goats toward the slope, their bells jingling softly. A man shoulders a mattock, heading for the terraced fields carved into the hillsides. You follow him for a bit, stepping past small clay jars, set to catch dew. The soil here is rocky stubborn. Every fig tree, every olive sapling is a small miracle. You bend down, touch the dry earth, and realize how thin the line is between feast and famine. Still, life goes on. You see laughter in the morning, hear gossip over grinding stones, sense the quiet faith woven into every gesture. Even the tools tell stories: handmade sickles with flint blades, storage jars painted with faint geometric designs. amulets tucked into corners to ward off bad luck. Quirky fact: some archaeologists once found a jar containing what looked suspiciously like ancient perfume, possibly used not just for smell, but as bug repellent. Iron Age mosquito control primitive, but clever. You wander further past a small enclosure where doves flutter in and out. Maybe they're kept for ritual sacrifice, maybe just for eggs. No one can say for sure. Archaeologists still argue whether animal pens found near houses were for food or faith. That's the thing about digging into the past, you're always guessing through fragments, reading a language written in dirt. The sun climbs higher, and the air begins to shimmer. The village is fully alive now. Children laughing, a baby crying, the faint ring of a hammer against the bronze. The smell of cooking drifts from every doorway. Onions frying lentils, simmering the unmistakable tang of goat's milk yogurt. You catch yourself smiling. This world may be ancient, but it feels strangely familiar. People still crave warmth, food, laughter, belonging. Only the backdrop has changed. You pause beside a wall, tracing a handprint left in drying clay centuries ago. Maybe it belonged to the woman at the hearth. Maybe to a child long grown to dust. Either way, it's a reminder. History isn't buried in textbooks. It's pressed into every wall, every crumb, every breath of this place. Somewhere in the distance, a ram's horn sounds the signal for morning prayers. The villagers stop, turn eastward. You follow their gaze, heart thudding softly. The desert stretches beyond the hills, endless, radiant, merciless. But for this small community, it's home. As the light grows harsher, you retreat to the shade, watching the shimmer of heat dance above the rooftops. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the song of ancient life flies. Footsteps, the crackle of a fire, and let yourself drift weightless in the cradle of time. The day has just begun, and already the story of survival is unfolding again, the same as it did yesterday, and the day before that, for thousands of years. You breathe it in the dust, the bread, the memory, and take another slow step into the past. The morning grows brighter, the sun washing everything in a pale gold that makes even the simplest things, clay walls, woven baskets, a line of hanging herbs seem holy. You walk up the narrow path that winds through the heart of the settlement, feeling the grit crunch under your sandals. It's not much of a town, really. More like a cluster of extended families built around shared wells and shared worries. A hilltop village, the kind that dots Iron Age Judea like freckles on a tanned arm. From a distance, it looks timeless. But get close, and you realize this place is alive with motion. Smoke drifts from rooftop ovens. Goats jostle through alleys, their horns brushing against the mud brick walls. You step aside for a woman, balancing a jug on her head, water from the village cistern, still cool from the night. The jug hums faintly with movement, and for a moment you think of archaeologists finding its twin thousands of years later, cracked but not forgotten. You can almost see them, the future researchers kneeling in the dust, brushing away centuries of soil, trying to guess what daily life looked like here. They find seeds, burnt bread tools, worn smooth by hands long gone. Historians still argue whether these hilltop settlements were built mainly for defense or for agriculture. Were they fortresses of faith or simply stubborn villages clinging to the high ground because it drained better after rain. The truth, as always, is probably both. You pass a wall where someone has painted red stripes, faded now, but once bright as pomegranate skin. Maybe it marked ownership, or maybe it was just decoration, a spark of joy in a harsh landscape. Archaeologists rarely agree on whether such designs were art or superstition. You decide it doesn't matter. A painted wall is still a whisper from someone who cared enough to make beauty last a little longer. At the top of the hill, you stop to look out. The land stretches in every direction. Terraced slopes, dry stream beds, silver olive groves shimmering in the wind. Somewhere to the west lies the coast where ships unload Phoenician goods and gossip. To the east, the desert yawns open fierce and silent. Between them, this village survives on faith sweat and a little luck. You crouch beside a row of small houses joined wall to wall. Each doorway opens into a single, dim room, maybe two at most. Inside, you spot woven mats, a few clay jars, a wooden yoke for carrying water. On a shelf sits a tiny figurine of a woman with wide hips and folded arms. Historians still debate whether she's a household goddess or just a fertility charm sold at the market. Either way, she's been touched so often her features have faded smooth. There's something tender about that, the devotion of hands repeated until belief becomes texture. In one corner, a man repairs a small plow, his hammer tapping a rhythm older than language. You can tell by his calloused fingers that he's used to the stubborn soil. He glances up, gives you a half smile that says, yes, life here is hard, but it's ours. You watch as his young son squats beside him, pretending to help holding a bent nail like it's treasure. Then something catches your eye, a cluster of long stones stacked oddly near the village gate. At first you think it's just part of the wall, but no, the stones are carved weathered smooth by centuries. You run your fingers across faint marking symbols, maybe early Hebrew letters. Archaeologists still argue whether these marks were names, prayers, or inventory lists. It's humbling to think that even in the age of kings and prophets, people still had shopping lists. A breeze drifts through, carrying the smell of wild thyme and drying dung fuel. The contrast makes you smile, beauty and practicality living side by side just as they always do. You pass a few goats, nibbling at thorny bushes, their shepherd nearby humming under his breath. The tune is old, but you could swear it's in 6/8 time, something almost jazzy about it. Ancient people, it seems, didn't need Spotify to find a rhythm. You stop at the edge of a courtyard where three women sit on low stools. They're gossiping while weaving flax, their fingers flying with practiced ease. Strands of pale fiber twist into thread and the thread into cloth. You lean closer and see tiny shells sewn along the hem, a touch of vanity or maybe protection. There's a superstition here, you recall, that certain shells ward off evil spirits. Quirky fact, archaeologists once found cowrie shells sought from the Red Sea, buried in Judean homes hundreds of miles inland. Either trade was bustling or people really went out of their way to keep the demons away. You're drawn to the sound of laughter, children chasing a chicken that seems more entertained than terrified. A woman scolds them from a doorway, but her tone is affectionate. She tosses a crust of bread toward the bird, which immediately forgets it was ever offended. Life here may be tough, but it's not joyless. You climb a few more steps, reaching the village's high point. From here, you can see the rooftops below the mosaic of lives stacked together like tiles. Some roofs are covered with drying figs, others with herbs, mint hyssop, maybe coriander. The air is a mix of sweetness and smoke. You take a deep breath, and it's almost hypnotic. It's strange how alive the silence feels here. The kind of silence that hums instead of empties. You can hear the low buzz of bees, the whisper of wind slipping between stones. You imagine yourself lying down right there on a rooftop mat, letting the day's heat wash over you. The smell of bread oil dust, it all blends into something oddly comforting. Below, you notice a line of figures walking the path toward the fields, tools slung across shoulders, baskets bouncing against their hips. Work begins early here and ends only when the stars come out. You'll follow them soon, but for now, you linger at the crest, watching the sunlight spill across the valley like honey. You feel the weight of time pressing softly around you, not heavy, just steady, like a hand on your shoulder reminding you to breathe. This hill, this village, this ordinary morning, it's all a fragment of eternity still whispering beneath the dust. And as you turn to follow the workers down toward the fields, you realize that every step you take is both an echo and a discovery. The past isn't behind you, it's beneath you, cradling your feet with every grain of sand. The air thickens with the smell of ash and baking grain as you descend from the ridge and step into the shaded courtyard of a family home. A low hum fills the space. Women grinding at quern stones, the scrape and thud of stone on stone marking the rhythm of their mourning. The walls around you are plastered smooth, painted in faint ochres. It's dim inside, but the light from a small window falls just right, illuminating a circle of warmth in which daily miracles take shape. You edge closer to the hearth. A woman, maybe 30, maybe 60. It's hard to tell, squats near the flames. Her hands are brown with flour and ash, her eyes focused on the flat bread, puffing gently atop a round ceramic griddle. The hearth crackles, and the smell is intoxicating toasted grain wood smoke and the faint sweetness of olive oil brushed on the dough before baking. You watch as she flips a loaf with a reed spatula, then presses the next ball of dough flat with her palms. The rhythm is steady, almost musical. This is her instrument, her performance played every morning for her family and her gods. She gestures for you to sit. You crouch beside her, feeling the heat radiate against your knees. On the wall behind her hangs a woven basket filled with dried herbs, coriander, dill, hyssop. The scent mingles with the bread, grounding you in the moment. She tears off a piece, passes it to you. It's still steaming. You take a bite. The taste is simple barley, and smoke maybe a touch of salt. But it carries a quiet power. You chew slowly, realizing that this same taste has passed through countless mouths before your shepherds, mothers, soldiers, prophets. This bread is their memory made edible. Historians still argue whether these small hearths were for daily meals or sacred offerings. Some believe each home doubled as a spiritual space, a tiny temple where nourishment and faith met in the fire. Others think the symbolism came later, that the act of cooking was just survival stripped of ritual. But sitting here, feeling the warmth and reverence in the air, you're inclined to believe both. You glance around. The floor is packed earth, swept smooth by bare feet. In one corner sits a jar filled with fine white powder, salt precious and rationed. In another, a small jug of oil, sealed with a flat shard of pottery. The woman hums softly, a tune so old it probably never had words. You think of how archaeologists once found songs inscribed on clay tablets, hymns to bread and fertility. Maybe this tune is the echo of one of them. Then something curious, a small depression in the hearth's edge darkened with soot. You lean in closer. The woman smiles, taps it with her finger, and says something that sounds like tamor, the local word for heat place or spirit spot. Quirky fact, in a few excavations across Judea, archaeologists found tiny idols buried near hearths. Miniature clay figures placed there for protection. Some looked human. Others, oddly enough, resembled frogs. Why frogs? No one knows. Maybe fertility, maybe luck, maybe just because frogs were weirdly endearing in a land where water was rare. She laughs suddenly, at you not unkindly, as you try to blow on the bread, burning your fingers anyway. The sound fills the small room, rich and contagious. You laugh too quietly, the kind of laugh that feels ancient and human and tired all at once. You glance toward the doorway. Outside, sunlight shivers through reeds, and a child's voice calls something probably about goats. The world beyond the hearth waits full of dust and work and shouting. But in here time, hold still. You're part of something old and slow and essential. She hands you another piece of bread, then reaches for a small bowl beside the fire. Inside is a mash of lentils and onions simmered until soft. She spoons a bit onto the bread, sprinkles it with coarse salt, and nods for you to eat. It's humble food, yes, but rich with depth, earthy, and soothing. You ask yourself how something so simple could feel so sacred. Maybe because it's honest. Every bite is the product of someone's labor fields, tilled grain ground wood, gathered fire tended. You can almost feel the centuries layered inside that bite. Historians still argue whether early Israelite women had specific social roles or whether everyone simply shared the grind of survival. Archaeological finds, spindle whorls, cooking stones, loom weights suggest that domestic spaces were power centers in their own right. A woman's hearth wasn't just a kitchen. It was an economy, a sanctuary, a workshop. Outside, you hear the shuffle of sandals, the murmur of men returning from the fields for a mid-morning meal. The woman wipes her hands on her tunic, nods toward the doorway. Go. Her gesture says, the day's not waiting. You step outside and blink in the glare. The village is alive with movement again, children fetching water, someone mending a roof with mud and straw, a donkey stubbornly refusing to move. The faint smell of bread lingers on your skin. As you walk toward the communal oven, larger, taller, built for many families, you realize how vital the hearth was to the story of this land. Bread wasn't just food, it was memory, covenant, comfort. When prayers spoke of breaking bread, they meant breaking time, sharing a link in a chain stretching backward forever. You glance back once more at the small house smoke curling through the hole in the roof. inside that glow, a woman kneels over the fire, shaping the next loaf of history. And as the wind rises and the smell of char fills the air, you wonder how many lives, how many generations have started and ended beside such a hearthstone, its flame steady, its warmth eternal. The grindstone sings before you even see it. That slow, heavy rhythm, the rasp of basalt against basalt, the sigh of grain turned to flour, guides you down a narrow alley toward an open courtyard. There beneath a stretched goatskin awning, two women kneel at a pair of flat circular stones. Each holds the upper stone by its wooden handles, rocking it back and forth in a hypnotic pattern that turns whole kernels into pale dust. You can almost feel the vibration through your knees as you crouch beside them. The smell is earthy, nutty, faintly sweet, the smell of barley just beginning to surrender its strength. The motion never stops. It's the heartbeat of the village. Historians still argue whether grinding was communal work or assigned to each household. But one thing's certain, no one escaped it. The average family spent hours each day just producing enough flour to survive. You think about your own blender back home, whirring lazily for 20 seconds, and you can't help but grin. You probably wouldn't last one sunrise in Iron Age Judea without complaining. The women grin back at you, amused by your soft city hands. One points to the quern as if daring you to try. You reach out, grip the rough wood, and push. The stone barely budges. Your arms protest instantly. She laughs a low, knowing laugh and shows you again, small motion, steady rhythm. You follow her lead, letting the weight of the upper stone do the work. The sound shifts, become smoother, almost meditative. You fall into the pulse of it, push, breathe, pull. Dust rises in the sunlight, catching like gold. When the bowl beneath fills, she scoops a handful of the coarse flour and lets it fall through her fingers. Barley, she says, tapping the grainy powder. Then she opens another jar, finer, whiter. Wheat. You remember that in this age, barley was the food of the poor, while wheat was prized, often reserved for temple offerings or wealthy households. Still, barley was stronger, hardier against drought. You get the feeling that barley didn't care whether people appreciated it. It just endured. You rub the flour between your palms, noticing the grit. There's a faint metallic tang, bits of ground stone mixed in from the quern surface. Archaeologists have actually found that Iron Age skeletons often show heavy tooth wear from years of chewing stone-dusted bread. Quirky fact, if you'd lived here by 40, your molars would look like gravel. A small girl darts past you, giggling, her hair braided with a bit of red thread. She holds a bundle of wild herbs, maybe mint or hyssop, and tosses a few sprigs into the flour. The older woman shakes her head, pretending to scold, but she smiles anyway. Even mischief finds its rhythm here. You glance around the courtyard. On one side, a stack of freshly fired bread griddles glows faintly pink from yesterday's heat. On the other, a goat dozes in the shade, chewing something that might once have been a sandal. A clay jar leaks slightly from a repaired crack, leaving a white crust of dried brine salt, precious enough to save even from the floor. Everything bears a trace of use, of care. Nothing is wasted. One of the women hums softly as she works a tune that seems to follow the turning of the stone. You find yourself breathing slower, matching the cadence. There's peace in this monotony, almost spiritual. Historians still argue whether labor like this was considered drudgery or devotion. Maybe both. After all, to grind grain was to participate in the most essential ritual of life, transforming what the earth gives into what the body needs. The air grows hazy with flour dust catching the light in floating halos. You feel it on your eyelashes, taste it on your tongue. It's oddly comforting, like the room itself is breathing out nourishment. One of the women straightens, wipes her hands on her tunic, and gestures for you to follow. She leads you to a corner where a flat basket sits covered by cloth. When she lifts it, the smell makes you blink. It's sour, sharp alive. A starter culture bubbling quietly in the warmth. She stirs it with a stick, smiles, and says a word that sounds like mother. You realize she's talking about the dough's leaven, the invisible life passed from day to day. Historians still argue whether Iron Age households kept such starters or if leavened bread appeared later. But here, in this imagined yet utterly real courtyard, it feels right. Of course, they would have kept a piece of yesterday to feed tomorrow. That's what survival is. A gust of wind sweeps through, scattering a bit of flour onto your clothes. The women laugh again this time at your ghost-white sleeves. You bow dramatically, pretending to accept the initiation. For a moment, the centuries dissolve you them, the rhythm, the dust. Time kneads itself into one smooth, endless cycle. When the work pauses, one woman brings out a small bowl of porridge, warm, slightly bitter, thick enough to stand a spoon in. She motions for you to taste. It's made from the coarser grindings left after sifting the poor man's breakfast. You eat a spoonful. It's plain, but the texture comforts you like edible silence. As you eat, she tells you something half joke, half truth that you can just barely catch. Without grain, even kings starve. You nod, thinking about how kingdoms rise on harvest, how civilizations crumble with drought. Archaeologists still debate whether grain storage was communal or private in these villages. But everyone agrees it was power. Whoever held the grain held the future. You finish the porridge, set the bowl aside, and stretch your aching arms. The sun has risen higher, painting long shadows across the yard. The women keep grinding, unbothered, eternal. Their stones will outlive them, so will the rhythm. You take one last look at the flour dust drifting in the air, and it strikes you that these simple movements, the scrape, the pour, the knead, have shaped more of human history than any battle or crown. And as you step back into the glare of the day, brushing the flour from your clothes, you realize that the heartbeat of Iron Age Judea wasn't war or worship. It was the steady sound of stone against stone grain becoming life day after day after day. The sun hangs just high enough now to bleach the edges of the stone walls white, and the courtyard smells like 100 different breakfasts. Smoke spice lentils and the faint sweetness of onions frying in oil all blend into the air like incense from 100 hearths. You follow your nose, an underrated compass, and find yourself at a doorway where something wonderful is simmering. Inside, an iron pot rests over a small clay stove, the kind made from mud and straw, that holds heat long after the flame dies. A young man sits beside it, stirring lazily with a wooden spoon. The stew inside ripples thickly, red-brown lentils, flecks of onion. maybe a few bits of garlic or leek. The scent makes your stomach growl audibly. He glances up, grins and gestures for you to sit. You crouch on a reed mat beside him. The pot hisses softly bubbling at the edges, and the smell, earthy and sweet, wraps around you like a blanket. Lentils. They're everywhere in ancient Judea, cheap, nourishing, dependable. Archaeologists have found their charred seeds in clay jars buried deep beneath house floors alongside barley and chickpeas. Lentils don't lie. They tell you who the common people were. He lifts a spoonful, blows on it, and offers it to you. It's rich, almost nutty, with a touch of smoke from the fire. You chew slowly. The texture is perfect soft, but not mushy. The kind of food that doesn't just fill you, but forgives you for being tired. You can see why, in Genesis, Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. You almost would too. Historians still argue whether that biblical story reflected a real cultural detail or just poetic symbolism. But the truth tastes like this warm, honest, satisfying. The lentil stew was the great equalizer. Peasants, prophets, soldiers, all of them ate from the same earthy bowl. The young man, his tunic patched but clean, tells you something in a tone that sounds both proud and amused. He points to the pot, then to himself. You catch a few words fast temple rain. You think he's saying the lentils are for a fasting day, or maybe for a ritual meal tied to the weather. Food and faith here are never far apart. When the rain stops, so do prayers of thanks, and begin the prayers of desperation. You glance around. The small room is simple. A few clay bowls, a wooden ladle, a jar of olive oil sealed with wax. On the wall hangs a dried bunch of onions, their papery skins whispering in the breeze. A cat curls in the corner, pretending not to care, but clearly watching for scraps. He reaches for a small jar. Beside him, opens it, and dips his finger inside. Salt. Coarse gray, almost moist. He sprinkles a pinch into the pot, stirs, and offers you another taste. You nod appreciatively. It's amazing how 1 grain of salt can elevate an entire meal even 3,000 years ago. Quirky fact, in ancient Hebrew, the word for salt, melech, also meant covenant. Salt wasn't just seasoning. It symbolized trust, permanence, friendship. To eat salt together was to share loyalty. So, congratulations, you've just become someone's covenant partner over lunch. He chuckles at your solemn nod, then pulls the pot from the fire. He sets it on a flat stone and ladles out 2 bowls. You eat in silence for a while. The cat eventually wins its campaign and gets a few lentils too. Outside the village hums the scrape of tools, the chatter of women trading herbs, the soft thud of a hammer shaping metal. Through the open doorway, you see a line of figures heading toward the fields again, their shadows long in the midday sun. The man gestures for you to follow him outside. He carries his bowl with one hand, balancing it easily, and walks toward a low stone wall overlooking the valley. You sit beside him, legs dangling. From here, the land looks vast and dry, but you notice small bursts of green lentil fields, fig trees, patches of barley waving in the breeze. Every bit of color is a victory against the desert. He points toward one of the terraces, a rectangle of reddish soil, and says something like aroma, the word for earth, but with a reverence that makes it sound like a name. You realize that in this world, the soil isn't just dirt, it's covenant too. Every harvest renews a promise between people and land, and every drought feels like a broken vow. Historians still debate how much control ordinary villagers had over their crops. Some say local chiefs or temple officials collected the best portions as tax. Others think families managed small communal plots and stored their harvests in shared silos. Either way, lentils endured. They grew in poor soil, needed little water, and returned nitrogen to the earth. Resilient little miracles. The young man finishes his bowl, wipes it clean with a scrap of bread, and stands. He stretches, squinting toward the horizon. You follow his gaze. The line of the hills shimmering in heat, the faint thread of a road leading to somewhere larger, older, maybe Jerusalem itself. He says something softly, perhaps a prayer. You don't need to know the words. The meaning sits heavy in the air. Gratitude for food, for soil, for another day alive. As you sit there, bowl empty, you feel something shift. The ordinary act of eating lentils and bread under a wide, merciless sky becomes communion. The simplicity of it humbles you. You think about your own kitchen, your own hurried meals, and wonder when you last felt this kind of quiet awe for something so small. A breeze picks up, carrying the smell of the stew, the faint buzz of bees, and a distant laugh. You close your eyes for a moment, memorizing the taste of the past salt lentils, dust, and sunlight, and breathe out slowly. The man pats your shoulder, grins again, and heads down the path. You stay behind a little longer, staring at the fields below, at the rhythm of life still unfolding. And you realize the daily table in Iron Age Judea wasn't just about food. It was a ceremony of endurance, a testament that even in hardship, people still found room for flavor, for gratitude, for joy. The afternoon drifts into a lazy amber haze, the kind that makes shadows long and thoughts longer. You follow the same man, or maybe you're following your nose, again, toward the center of the village. There beneath an olive tree, so ancient, it looks like it's been gossiping with the wind since the flood, a few women sit around a flat basalt slab. They're grinding something slow, rhythmic, almost musical. The stones rasp and hum in perfect counterpoint with the cicadas. You edge closer, curious. The air smells like warm wheat and sunlight. One of the women looks up, smiling. The universal smile that says, "Yes, you can watch, but don't get in the way." She gestures toward the millstone. Two heavy circular rocks, stacked like pancakes, the top one spinning as she turns a wooden peg. The sound is hypnotic. You realize you're watching one of the oldest scenes in human history, the making of bread. Flour dust floats through the air like mist. You breathe it in. It tastes faintly nutty, faintly alive. Archaeologists have found identical stones buried across Iron Age Judea, worn smooth by years of use. Their grooves are like fingerprints of the ancient kitchen proof that before kings and prophets there were bakers. The woman opens her hand and shows you the coarse flour speckled with bits of bran. Barley, she says. Not wheat, too expensive, too royal. Barley is for everyday people, cheap, sturdy, forgiving when the rains are unkind. She mixes the flour in a wide clay bowl, adds a pinch of salt, and then pours in water from a goat skin. Her hands move with easy precision, kneading the dough until it's smooth and elastic. You can hear it squeak faintly against her palms. She smiles at your fascination, then jokes something you can't quite understand, but everyone laughs. You assume it's something along the lines of, "You city folks don't know what real bread is." She tears off small portions and flattens them into discs, pressing them against a curved clay surface propped over glowing embers, the Taban oven. You feel the heat radiate against your shins. Within seconds, the dough puffs up golden brown little bubbles forming like tiny mountains of air. The smell, oh, the smell is divine. Warm, slightly smoky with that primal, comforting scent that says you've survived another day. You watch one loaf fall into the ashes, and she quickly fishes it out, dusts it off, and shrugs. "Still good," she says with a grin. You take a bite when she offers it still warm enough to sting your fingertips. It's chewy, hearty, slightly sour, from the wild yeast living in the clay walls of the oven. Mainstream fact. Excavations at Tel Be'er Sheva and Lachish have revealed these tabun ovens almost everywhere inside houses and courtyards, even in temples. Bread wasn't just food, it was the heartbeat of daily life. Every dawn began with grinding grain. Every dusk ended with bread shared and stories told. Quirky tidbit sometimes, they baked bread directly on heated pebbles, or even on flat metal pans greased with oil, an Iron Age prototype of your modern frying pan. So yes, your pancake game, ancient. As you chew, you notice a small clay jar beside the oven. You peek inside. It's filled with something thick and amber. Honey. Precious and rare. The woman dips a fingertip in, then offers it to you. It's floral, rich, and unexpectedly complex. In this world, honey is both medicine and miracle. Historians still argue whether the land flowing with milk and honey meant literal bee honey or a syrup made from dates. You, for one, decide not to argue. You just savor it, letting the sweetness melt into the smoky bread. One of the children brings over a small dish olive oil scented with crushed herbs. You tear another piece of bread, dip it in, and bite. The oil coats your tongue like gold, and the herbs thyme, hyssop, maybe oregano, sing faintly of the hills nearby. You could almost weep from the simplicity of it. They talk among themselves, voices weaving together like music. You catch fragments about harvests, marriages, and the new clay jar someone traded for a goat. The world here is small, yes, but beautifully complete. You look around the courtyard and spot another oven in the corner, larger, with soot-blackened sides. The older woman tending it explains through gestures that this one's for larger batches, maybe for a feast or for sale. She points to a shelf lined with small clay figures, household gods, fertility charms, tiny horses. They watch silently as bread rises as if blessing every loaf. One of the women notices your gaze and says something about the gods being old, then waves her hand dismissively. There's a quiet tension there, a tug between the old, polytheistic habits and the growing worship of a single god. You realize you're standing at a turning point in spiritual history, and it smells like freshly baked bread. The woman hands you another piece. You eat it slower this time. Outside, the sky has shifted darker blues mixing with orange streaks. Smoke from a dozen ovens curls upward, carrying the aroma of evening meals. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries and a donkey brays in response. The rhythms of the village hum like a song you didn't know you knew. The baker woman wipes her hands and sits finally, taking a piece of her own bread. You sit beside her, and for a while, you both eat quietly, watching sparks from the fire drift into the sky. You think of all the hands through time that have kneaded dough, broken bread, shared warmth across languages and centuries. In that moment, you realize archaeology isn't really about ruins, it's about recipes. Every artifact was touched by someone who got hungry, got tired, got human. The woman offers you one last piece. You break it in half, hand her a share, and smile. It's not a feast, but it feels sacred. The faint sweetness of honey still lingers on your tongue as the first stars appear above the olive tree. And somewhere inside you, the modern noise, the deadlines, the screens, the everything quietly softens. You're not just learning history tonight, you're tasting it. The bread still warms your palms as you wander away from the courtyard, its smell clinging to your tunic like memory. The path curves between low stone walls, past goats bleating lazily, and children chasing a rolling hoop made of bent reeds. You can hear laughter, the sound of a flute, and the soft hum of life unfolding under a copper-colored sky. You follow the trail toward what looks like a cluster of clay jars half buried in the ground. At first you think they're water storage, but then the scent hits you, a deep green aroma, sharp and rich. Olive oil. You kneel beside one of the jars and peer inside. The surface glows faintly in the fading light, catching the reflection of your face and the reddening clouds above. A woman nearby is pressing olives in a simple wooden press, 2 beams a screw and a basket woven from reeds. She turns the handle slowly, her hands strong and sure. Thick golden liquid trickles from the basket into a small clay bowl. You can almost taste it from the air alone, grassy, fruity, faintly bitter, the essence of the Mediterranean. Olive oil, the liquid gold of ancient Judea. She greets you with a nod and a smile, then pours a bit of the oil into your palm. It's warm, fragrant. You rub your fingers together, feeling its smoothness. It's not just food. It's light medicine and holiness all in one. Archaeologists have found entire olive presses carved into bedrock across Judea and Galilee, evidence that this humble oil shaped the economy, religion, and identity of the region. She motions for you to follow. Together, you step into a small shelter where several oil lamps hang from wooden beams. The light flickers golden and soft, and the air smells faintly of smoke and pressed fruit. She lights one lamp using the new oil, and the flame leaps to life, instantly steady and calm. Mainstream. Fact, olive oil fueled nearly every lamp in the Iron Age Levant. Without it, darkness ruled after sunset. Oil meant safety, vision warmth, and maybe a little gossip after hours. She hands you a slice of yesterday's bread, dipped in oil and crushed herbs. You take a bite. It's rich, velvety, and utterly perfect. Quirky tidbit, some Judean households even mixed oil with wine or honey for skincare, a DIY beauty regimen that predates Sephora by about 3,000 years. The woman laughs softly when you lick the last drop from your finger. She points toward the jars again and says something that sounds like temple, then gestures upward. You remember that oil wasn't only for kitchens. It anointed kings, consecrated priests, sealed covenants. It was a sign that something or someone was set apart. Historians still argue whether the common folk understood the full symbolism of oil or simply used it as a practical staple. But you sense both truths living together here, like light and shadow in the same flame. You sit as she continues her work, pressing the next batch of olives. The rhythmic creak of wood, the trickle of golden liquid, it's oddly soothing. You find yourself breathing slower, your thoughts blending with the hum of the evening. Outside, the first stars begin to appear, and you notice a young boy carrying a jar of oil carefully through the street, his expression serious. He's likely taking it to a nearby house for their lamps. You watch him go, his small silhouette outlined by the last breath of sunlight, and realize how vital this daily ritual is. In a world without electricity, every flame is a fragile victory over darkness. You lean back against the wall, closing your eyes for a moment. The air is thick with the scent of olives and smoke. You imagine the countless nights before this one, when people gathered under the same stars, sharing stories by lamplight, songs of shepherds, psalms of longing, legends of prophets. Then, as if on cue, someone begins to sing nearby, a slow, lilting tune in a minor key. You can't understand the words, but the melody carries that ancient blend of joy and sorrow. It's probably a harvest song, thanking the olive trees for their yearly mercy. The woman joins in softly while she works her voice, weaving through the rhythm of the press. The sound feels like it's coming from the earth itself, low and timeless. You open your eyes again and watch her pour the oil into a jug. Seal it with cloth and tie it with a strip of palm fiber. Every movement is ritual, deliberate, reverent, unhurried. You reach out to touch one of the finished jars. It's cool and smooth, heavy with meaning. Somewhere far in the future, archaeologists will find jars just like this one, cracked, but still smelling faintly of olives, and wonder who sealed them, who sang beside them. And the answer will be someone like her. Someone who loved the light. The woman gestures toward the lamp hanging beside you. The flame dances steadily, reflecting in her eyes. She says something soft, maybe a blessing, maybe just good night. You nod. You step outside again. The village glows now with dozens of small lamps flickering in the darkness. Each doorway is a tiny sunrise, a promise that warmth and light persist. You walk between them, passing whispers, laughter, a distant bark of a dog. The stars are out in full now, so bright you could almost read by them. You pause at a well. Near the edge of the village, the reflection of the stars ripples in the water, joined by the trembling light of an oil lamp someone left beside it. You dip your fingers in the coolness, shocking against the warmth of the night. Above, the sky feels vast and alive, as if waiting to hear your thoughts. You whisper a quiet thank you to the trees, to the people, to the shared moment across time. The oil on your hands glistens faintly in the lamplight, and you understand why the ancients saw holiness in this golden sheen. In a world lit only by oil and hope, every drop is sacred. The road slopes gently downhill, and the scent of oil and smoke fades into the cool sweetness of night air. You hear water before you see it, a faint trickling sound weaving through the stones like a secret. When you round the corner, there it is, a small spring fed into a rock basin, shimmering faintly under starlight. Two women stand knee-deep in the shallow pool, washing clothes with steady, rhythmic motions. You pause at a respectful distance, the splash and hum of their voices wrapping around you. The sound is soothing, almost hypnotic. You watch as they twist fabric, slap it against a flat rock, then rinse again. The ripples catch the reflection of the stars, turning the water into liquid silver. It's easy to forget that water here is precious, every drop a miracle. Wells and springs are the lungs of the land, and villages grow only where the earth agrees to breathe. Archaeologists have found stone-lined cisterns and channels dating back to the Iron Age, proof that entire communities rose and fell based on their ability to store rainwater. You kneel beside the basin, scoop a handful, and let it run through your fingers. It's cool and pure, tasting faintly of minerals and moss. The women notice and smile, one of them gesturing for you to drink. You oblige, and the freshness fills your chest like a soft sigh. Mainstream fact: most households in Iron Age Judea relied on communal cisterns carved into limestone to collect winter rain. Water management wasn't just engineering, it was survival. Every drought could turn sacred festivals into desperate prayers. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believed that springs had guardian spirits, ayin mayim, protectors of the water. Offerings of herbs or flowers were sometimes tossed into the basin to keep the flow steady. You glance down again at the glimmering pool and notice a few petals floating. Maybe tradition lingers longer than theology. The younger woman points to a small clay jar sitting on the bank. You open it out of curiosity. Inside is coarse, grayish powder, soap. Not the floral scented kind from your bathroom, but a simple mixture of ash and fat. You sniff cautiously. It smells industrious. She laughs at your grimace and dips her hands in working up a thin lather that she spreads over the fabric. The cloth brightens visibly under her scrubbing. You try to imagine the daily rhythm here: drawing water, carrying jars, washing, drying, repeating. Hard work. Yet there's something deeply grounding about it. The women gossip softly, laughter slipping between their words like pebbles through a stream. You catch fragments: someone's wedding, someone's goat, someone's lazy husband. History, you realize, isn't written in stone. It's murmured in conversations like this. One of them pauses and looks up at the night sky. You follow her gaze. The stars shimmer like shards of glass scattered across velvet. She hums a short tune, a lullaby maybe, and the other joins in. Their voices blend with the burbling spring until you can't tell where song ends and water begins. Historians still argue whether women in Iron Age Judea had distinct public roles or were confined to household labor. Yet here, under starlight, they seem like the quiet architects of continuity. While kings rise and fall, someone must still fetch water, wash clothes, soothe babies, and sing the world steady. The younger woman offers you a bundle of herbs tied with twine, thyme, mint, and something citrusy. She pantomimes rubbing it on your skin, a rustic kind of bath ritual. You thank her, then mimic her motions, dipping the herbs into the water and brushing them along your arms. The scent is sharp and clean. For a moment, you feel entirely refreshed, reborn by the same ancient rhythm that has washed the dust off humanity for millennia. A goat bleats somewhere up the hill, breaking the spell. The women laugh again, gathering their clean garments into baskets. They sling them onto their hips and start back toward the village, their silhouettes framed against the milky glow of the stars. You follow slowly, still listening to the faint splash of the spring fading behind you. On the way, you pass a low wall where clay jars line up in neat rows, catching moonlight. A man is filling one carefully with water from a leather bucket. He nods in greeting, then says something you half understand, something about tomorrow's feast. You point toward the sky in question, and he smiles, nodding vigorously. You continue down the path, and soon the faint smell of roasting barley drifts toward you. Fires crackle again this time in preparation for the evening meal. People sit outside talking softly, their faces glowing amber in the firelight. You see the baker woman from earlier, tearing bread. The oil press woman pouring a little lamp fuel. The man from the lentil pot laughing with a child on his lap. It feels like the entire village breathes in unison. You sit quietly on a stone and watch it all, the shared food, the shared warmth, the rhythm of hands and voices. You realize how invisible most of these acts are to history books. No chronicles mention who fetched water or washed the linen, but without them, nothing else could stand. Someone hands you a cup of water mixed with a hint of honey and herbs. You drink slowly, feeling the coolness trickle down your throat. The firelight flickers across your hands, catching the faint sheen of olive oil that still clings there from earlier. A child points to the sky, shouting a word you recognize, Shamayim, heaven. You follow his finger and see the first trace of the Milky Way stretching across the black. It feels like an invisible road leading somewhere both distant and familiar. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the night fold around you. Crickets, laughter, crackling, fire, the far-off whisper of the spring. You're no longer just observing history. You're inhabiting it, one breath, one sip, one heartbeat at a time. And as the last of the light fades from the hills, you think maybe heaven was never up there. Maybe it was always down here in the shared work, the laughter, and the water that never stops flowing. The village begins to quiet as the night deepens, though the air still hums with the warmth of human life. Voices softening embers, pulsing red, a goat's bell clinking somewhere beyond the fields. You rise and wander toward the outskirts, where the hills are dotted with terraced stones. The moon has climbed high enough to silver everything in its calm light, and you follow a faint trail that smells faintly of dust herbs and something tangy, fermenting grapes. The path opens into a small vineyard, the vines low and gnarled their leaves, whispering faintly in the breeze. A man crouches by a shallow stone pit, stomping grapes with the unhurried patience of someone who's done this all his life. His feet are stained purple, his tunic splattered with juice. He looks up, grins, and waves you closer. The scent here is intoxicating sweet, tart, alive. The air feels heavier, like it's already drunk on the promise of wine. You watch as the man scoops up the crushed pulp and pours it into a clay jar, then seals it with a cloth. Fermentation in its earliest and most sacred form. Mainstream fact. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient wine presses like this all across Israel and Judah, complete with treading floors and collection basins. Wine wasn't just luxury, it was nutrition currency and theology bottled in one. It purified water, fueled trade, and offered comfort in ritual and sorrow alike. You crouch beside the man. He speaks, gesturing with his stained hands, and though you catch only fragments, you recognize a few words: joy, festival, blood. You nod. The metaphors of wine are eternal. He scoops a ladleful from a nearby jar, deep red, flecked with bits of skin, and offers it to you. The taste is wild sweet at first, then sharply earthy, with a faint echo of the clay jar it fermented in. It's not your sleek modern Cabernet, but it's alive in a way that your palate forgot was possible. You cough a little, and he laughs so loudly that even the moon seems to shiver. Strong, he says, clapping your shoulder. You can't disagree. He gestures toward the vines and says something about the hills of Samaria and Shiloh. Maybe he's bragging about where his grapes come from, the ancient equivalent of name-dropping a famous vineyard. You grin and nod approvingly. He points to a stone shelf where several jars sit tilted at odd angles, their surfaces crusted with dried juice. You realize this is the ancient version of a cellar, keeping the jars cool through the night. Nearby, a small fire crackles, and a woman tends a pot filled with something bubbling, gently boiling down grape syrup, perhaps, or cooking a sauce for the feast tomorrow. Quirky tidbit: the people of Iron Age Judea didn't just drink wine, they cooked with it, cleaned with it, and even used it in medicine. One common remedy mixed wine with crushed pomegranate to soothe stomach aches. The original red wine cleanse, centuries before influencers tried to make it trendy. As the man returns to stomping grapes, you help by carrying a few baskets over. The fruit is soft under your fingers, each one bursting slightly as you lift it. You pour them into the pit and step back, watching as he treads again, rhythmically, almost like dancing. The squelch and splash of juice against stone create a kind of heartbeat in the night. Historians still argue whether vineyards were privately owned or part of larger communal estates run by local elites. Some think each family tended small patches for household use. Others believe priests and officials controlled production for temple offerings. Either way, wine flowed through both economy and faith, linking gods, kings, and farmers in one long, sweet stain of history. The man motions for you to try. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. You slip off your sandals and step into the pit. The grapes pop under your feet, cool, slippery, and oddly satisfying. The juice oozes between your toes, sticky but strangely joyous. The man cheers, the woman laughs, and for a brief moment, you're part of something older than language, the shared labor of turning fruit into memory. When you finish, he hands you a cloth to wipe your legs, then pours another cup of wine. This one's lighter, younger, half-fermented, half-promise. You sip it slowly. The stars above tilt and blur a little, and you can't tell if it's the wine or the wonder. The man hums a tune deep and rough. You recognize its rhythm. It's a harvest chant, half song, half prayer. The woman joins in, her voice softer, higher. Together, they fill the night with melody, and you realize how little separates labor from celebration here. Work is worship. He raises his cup toward the sky, muttering something you recognize, l'shaim to life. You echo it quietly. You both drink. The sweetness settles into you like warmth spreading from the inside out. You sit together for a while, watching the moonlight spill across the vines, the jars, the glistening juice drying to a dark crust on the stone floor. Somewhere nearby, a jackal howls its voice bending with the hills. The man tells you half-jokingly that every jar holds a story, and that the best wines keep secrets from even the gods. You believe him. You imagine the jars being buried rediscovered, tasted again centuries later, each sip a resurrection. You tilt your head back and look at the stars through the net of vines. The air smells of earth fruit smoke and a hint of eternity. Tomorrow, there will be more work, more grapes, more pressing, more sealing. But tonight, it's enough to know that in this tiny corner of the world, humanity has already learned the art of joy pressed into jars, shared among friends, and poured out freely under an ancient sky. You raise your cup again, not to drink this time, but in quiet salute to the vintners of the past, to the fields that never stopped growing, and to the stories still fermenting in the dark. The wine glows faintly in the moonlight, as if remembering the sun. By dawn, the air has cooled again, the sweetness of crushed grapes replaced by the crisp bite of morning dew. The vineyard sleeps now, its jars sealed and shadows stretching long. You follow the same dusty path back toward the heart of the village, where smoke rises thinly from new fires and roosters announce the return of order after celebration. As you walk, a low hum ripples through the hills, men and women chanting something steady rhythmic. You follow the sound until it opens into a courtyard carved into the slope ringed by whitewashed walls and fig trees. At the center stands a stone altar plain but dignified. Around it, priests in linen robes move with deliberate grace, preparing what looks like a morning sacrifice. You stop at the edge, unseen, half hidden, behind a fig trunk. The air smells of ash honey and freshly baked bread. The priests carry bowls of grain and oil, their voices weaving a melody older than memory. Mainstream fact: daily offerings called tamid were performed every morning and evening in ancient Israel's temple service. A lamb flour and wine were offered together to maintain the covenant between God and his people. Even in local sanctuaries like this one, far from Jerusalem, villagers echoed the rhythm with their own modest rituals. You watch as one priest lays a small lamb on the altar murmuring a prayer. Another sprinkles salt on the grain, offering symbol of preservation and purity. A third pours wine into a shallow basin, the liquid shimmering like blood in the early light. The scent of roasting meat and baked flour rises slowly into the air, twisting into the dawn breeze like a second sunbeam. It's mesmerizing, the precision, the quietness, the choreography of faith. No drama, no spectacle, just steady, reverent repetition. A rhythm that has shaped millennia. Quirky tidbit salt was so valuable in the Iron Age that it sometimes doubled as wages, hence the Latin root of the word salary. So when you see the priest sprinkling it, you're watching an act that costs something real, not symbolic generosity, but literal sacrifice. One of the younger priests, barely more than a boy, brings forward a small jar. You recognize it instantly, wine from last night's vineyard. It's unfiltered, flecked with bits of grape skin. He tilts it carefully, pouring it over the altar stone. The red trails spiral down the carved grooves and vanish into the thirsty rock. You can almost hear the sizzle where wine meets fire. For a moment, it's as if the vineyard, the feast, and the sacrifice have folded together into one seamless act: celebration, gratitude, and surrender, all sharing the same cup. The head priest steps forward now. His voice deepens as he begins a prayer in a language you partly understand. Blessed are you, Lord of the heavens and earth, who brings forth fruit from the vine and life from the dust. His words feel familiar even now, echoing in fragments of modern rituals: the breaking of bread, the raising of cups, the murmured thanks before eating. You realize how much of today's sacred language was seeded here among smoke salt and the simplest acts of daily survival. The villagers kneel as the priest lifts his hands. The lamb's bones crack softly in the fire. The smell of burning fat mingles with wild thyme. Somewhere behind you, a child cries, a dog barks, and the wind carries both sounds away. Mainstream fact: in later centuries, after the Babylonian exile, animal sacrifices were replaced by prayer and study. But here, centuries before that transformation, holiness is still tangible, something you can smell, touch, and taste. You step back, careful not to disturb the ritual. A fig leaf brushes your cheek. You look at the crowd: farmers, shepherds, potters, mothers, balancing clay jars on their heads, all gathered, not out of obligation, but continuity. This is how they keep the world, turning one burnt offering at a time. As the smoke rises higher, you glance at the horizon. The sun peeks over the hills, flooding the valley with gold. The first light hits the altar stone, and suddenly it gleams bright, alive, almost breathing. You remember something you read once. Archaeologists uncovered dozens of rural shrines across ancient Israel, small altars, carved from local limestone, some even with drainage channels for poured wine and blood. Each told a story, not of grand temples, but of community faith, the quiet heartbeat of a people trying to stay connected to something infinite. The priest lowers his arms. The chant fades. The villagers bow their heads, whispering personal prayers into their hands. Then slowly, the courtyard begins to dissolve back into daily life. Some carry ashes for their fields, believing it will bless the soil. Others pack the leftover bread to share with neighbors. A few linger to clean the altar, humming softly. You stay behind for a while, feeling the warmth from the stones seep into your palms. The heat isn't just from the fire, it's from the countless mornings like this one, layered beneath your feet. Each generation has offered something: grain, lamb, salt, wine, or simply breath, and those offerings have never stopped rising. A small girl, no older than 7, runs past you carrying a handful of fresh flowers. She places them beside the altar. Wild blossoms, bright yellow, already wilting in the sun. You wonder if she was told to, or if she simply wanted to add something beautiful. Either way, her gesture completes the circle creation, returning itself to the Creator. You step back onto the path, the last curls of smoke trailing into the blue. The village behind you, hums to life again, pots clanging voices, calling a donkey, braying somewhere near the well. The sacred dissolves into the ordinary once more. And maybe that's the real miracle, not thunder or angels or visions, but this effortless merging of divine and daily. A God who doesn't just live in temples, but in the smell of bread, in the press of grapes, in the light that touches every stone. You take a final look at the courtyard before turning to leave. The priest catches your eye and nods a knowing half-smile on his face, as if he's seen 1,000 wanderers like you people from nowhere, drawn by a quiet call they can't explain. You nod back. As you walk away, you feel lighter, not because you've left something behind, but because you've remembered something timeless, that the sacred was never far. It was always in the smoke, the soil, the song. You follow the narrow path down toward the lower part of the settlement, where the noise of morning work has begun in earnest. Donkeys shuffle under heavy loads. Women fill jars at the communal well, and the clang of tools echoes faintly from somewhere behind a stone wall. The smell of baking bread still lingers, but this time it's mixed with something earthier. Lentils simmering in clay pots, onions roasting in olive oil. You pause near a small open courtyard shaded by grapevines. A handful of men sit cross-legged on woven mats, their rough tunics streaked with dust. Before them lies a round flatbread darkened from the fire torn into pieces and passed hand to hand. This isn't a feast. It's breakfast for the poor workers and shepherds, the unremarkable crowd who make the world function. One of them looks up, gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself onto the mat. Someone hands you a piece of bread, warm and smoky. Another passes a small clay bowl of lentil stew, thick, fragrant, and surprisingly satisfying. You take a bite, and the world around you softens. Mainstream fact in Iron Age Judea. The diet of the lower classes revolved around bread, lentils, onions, garlic, and a little olive oil. Meat was rare, often reserved for sacrifices or special occasions. Archaeologists confirm this from the carbonized seeds, grinding stones, and animal bones found in household debris. Daily meals were modest, but nutritionally balanced in their own humble way. One man wipes his hands on his tunic, leans toward you and grins. You know he says we work for barley and salt, but we dream of figs and honey. The group laughs low and weary, but genuine. You smile too. It's the kind of humor that keeps hunger from turning bitter. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that poor villagers flavored their stews with foraged wild herbs, sumac, hyssop, or even crushed pistachio shells for a touch of flavor when salt ran low. You catch that tang now, a faint lemony sharpness under the lentils. Someone's grandmother clearly knew her plants. You glance around the courtyard. The walls are patched with straw and mud. A goat peers over a fence, chewing something it probably shouldn't. A barefoot child toddles past with a broken jug handle, pretending it's a sword. The women nearby are grinding grain, their hands moving in a rhythm older than speech. They hum softly, half song, half sigh. Historians still argue whether these courtyard gatherings were purely practical or subtly ritualistic, part meal, part prayer, part communal affirmation of survival. When food is scarce, even eating becomes sacred. You tear another piece of bread and dip it into the lentils. The stew is thick and dark, with the sweetness of onions cooked long over a slow fire. The man beside you gestures with his crust of bread. Our fathers ate the same, he says, and their fathers before them. The land gives, and we take only what it gives. You nod. The simplicity of his words feels heavier than any sermon. As you eat, your eyes wander toward the edge of the courtyard. There's a small altar stone there, too. Nothing grand, just a flat slab with faint scorch marks. Someone's poured a little oil on it, maybe in gratitude for a good harvest, maybe just because gratitude itself needs no reason. A woman walks over and kneels before the altar. She whispers a prayer you can't quite hear, then presses a crust of bread onto the stone before walking away. You wonder if it's an offering or a wish. The men finish eating. One wipes the clay bowls clean with bits of bread before handing them back to a young boy who scampers off toward the well. Another stands, stretches, and says something about a field that needs plowing. Life doesn't wait for comfort, it demands motion. You stay seated for a while, feeling the weight of the sun creep higher. The shade from the grapevines begins to shrink. The smell of lentils fades, replaced by the dry tang of dust and sweat. Somewhere nearby, a hammer strikes metal. A smith working on tools or hinges may be repairing a plow. Mainstream fact: small. Iron Age villages in Judea were often communal in labor. Fields tools and ovens were shared. Archaeologists have found multi-house courtyards with a single oven, suggesting cooperation rather than competition, a rare feature compared to many ancient societies. You look back at the now empty bowls, still warm from the stew. They're handmade, uneven, the clay, mixed with crushed limestone for strength. Some archaeologists spend lifetimes studying shards like these, reconstructing the social fabric of the ancient poor from fragments no larger than your palm. Each chip of pottery tells you who worked, who ate, who prayed. Quirky tidbit: sometimes potters inscribed blessings inside the base of bowls before firing them. Tiny invisible words meant to bring luck or protection to whoever ate from them. You wonder if your bowl had one. Maybe it whispered, "May your hunger be light." You stand and brush the dust from your knees. The men wave as you go, already turning back to their work. The sound of the millstones rises again, the same grinding hum that started your day. Somewhere a rooster crows late, indignant about something trivial. As you step back onto the main path, you realize how much these humble meals reveal. No feasts, no golden cups, no imported spices, just bread, lentils, salt, and company. Enough to live, enough to remember. Historians still debate whether such simplicity reflected poverty or wisdom. Was it necessity or virtue? You suspect the answer lies somewhere between. The poor didn't choose hunger, but they did choose to share what they had. And maybe that's the truest wealth of all. You pause one last time, looking over the valley. The wind rises, carrying the scent of thyme and smoke. Below, the fields shimmer in green and gold, ready for harvest. You think of the people you've met, the priests, the vintners, the shepherds, and realize they're all bound by the same rhythm: take, bless, break, share. You take a deep breath, tasting the dust, the bread, the salt. It's not a grand meal, but it's honest, and somehow it fills you completely. You climb again toward the upper terraces of the village, where the walls are smoother, the jars larger, and the shadows longer. The air feels heavier here, not just with heat, but with wealth. Someone nearby is roasting lamb on a spit, the scent rich and dizzying after your lentil breakfast. Bronze catches the sun like liquid fire. You've stepped into another world, the table of the few. A servant nods as you approach, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She gestures toward an open courtyard shaded by tall columns. Cushions lie scattered on woven rugs. Two men recline, speaking in low voices while sipping from polished cups. They're dressed in dyed linen blue, a color that poor families can't afford. Behind them, a woman in a crimson shawl crushes herbs with a stone pestle, mixing something aromatic. Mainstream fact during the Iron Age. Wealthy households in Judea had access to imported goods through Phoenician and Egyptian trade routes, spices like cinnamon, luxury oils, even bronze and ivory utensils. Archaeologists have found fragments of these objects in elite compounds at sites like Lachish and Megiddo, proof of an early international economy. A servant brings out a tray, figs, dates, goat cheese, and flatbread baked thinner than the ones you ate below. The bread is sprinkled with sesame seeds shining with oil. You take a bite and nearly sigh. It's softer, richer, seasoned with herbs you can't name. The man across from you notices your surprise. From Tyre, he says, smiling. Traders brought the oil last moon. Expensive, but worth it. He waves toward the west. The sea gives us more than storms. You can't help but laugh softly. And takes more than money, you reply. He chuckles. True enough. Last year, the salt tax rose again. The governor claims it's to pay for the fortress at Hazor. We pay in silver. The poor pay in sweat. Historians still argue whether Iron Age taxation was centralized or handled locally by tribal leaders. But every fragment of correspondence found the famous Lachish letters among them, whispers of tension between Jerusalem's rulers and the countryside. For every wealthy household like this, dozens scraped by in the valley below. A servant pours wine into your cup, careful not to spill. It's darker, heavier than the peasant vintage aged in imported amphorae sealed with pine resin. You swirl it gently, watching the deep red glint in the light. Quirky tidbit, some archaeologists found traces of resin and even honey in ancient Judean wine jars, early flavoring experiments that made local wine competitive with Mediterranean imports. Essentially, you're sipping a 700-year-old recipe for artisanal product placement. As the sun dips lower, the courtyard fills with the lazy sound of conversation. The woman brings out roasted lamb, now glistening with oil and herbs. She carves it expertly, offering each piece on bronze skewers. The smell alone feels decadent. You taste it. The meat is tender, smoky, and faintly sweet from pomegranate glaze. The man beside you smirks, noticing your slow chewing. You like that. My cook swears by adding crushed dates before roasting. You grin. I'd believe it. He leans closer. It's a small secret. Don't tell the priests. You glance toward the servants clearing plates and think of the workers you left earlier. Their lentils, their coarse bread, their laughter. Here, laughter sounds different, softer, polished. It carries less hunger and more habit. Mainstream fact dietary differences between classes in ancient Judea weren't just about ingredients, they reflected status, identity, and even theology. To eat richly was to show divine favor. To eat simply was to embody humility. Scholars still debate whether the prophet's criticism of indulgence, like Amos, condemning those who lie on beds of ivory, was purely moral or partly political. The man across from you sighs contentedly. You know he says, some say wealth is proof of blessing. Others say it's a test. He glances toward the distant hills. I'm still deciding which one it is. You nod, watching the shadows creep up the stone walls. Maybe both, you say. Blessings can be heavy things. He laughs genuinely this time and raises his cup. Then may yours be light, traveler. You drink. The wine hums in your veins, soft and warm. Around you, the servants begin to pack away the dishes. One collects the lamb bones into a basket, likely for dogs, or perhaps for ritual disposal. Another brings out a small dish of perfumed oil, letting the guests rub a little onto their fingers. Quirky tidbit, perfumed oils were not merely cosmetic. They masked the scent of sweat, served as disinfectant, and in some cases were offered as gifts of peace or respect. You remember that the same oils show up centuries later, poured on the heads of kings and prophets alike. The courtyard quiets. The man leans back, eyes half closed. Sometimes he murmurs, I envy the laborers. Their worries are simple. Bread, water, sun. They sleep well. You tilt your head, and you... He smiles without opening his eyes. I sleep beneath the weight of silver. It's softer than stone, but no warmer. The remark lingers. You look around the elegant courtyard, the columns, the rugs, the faint scent of lamb, and realize that comfort has its own kind of loneliness. The poor share what they have. The rich guard it carefully. Historians still argue whether social mobility existed in ancient Judea or if class was fixed by birth. The artifacts suggest occasional overlap, merchants who rose, nobles who fell. But the daily table told the truer story. How and with whom one broke bread defined one's place in the world. The last light of day fades. A servant lights a bronze lamp. Its flame dances in the wine's reflection. The courtyard glows gold again, not from wealth, but from firelight, soft, fleeting, and equal to every other flame in the village. You rise, thanking your hosts. The man nods, barely noticing your departure. His wife offers you a fig for the road, a small sweetness unexpected. You bite it as you step into the cool night juice sticky on your fingers. Down below, you can see the faint flicker of dozens of smaller fires. The poor's lamps, glowing in clusters, form a constellation of humble stars. You realize how both worlds, the rich and the poor, depend on the same light. You smile to yourself, whispering into the darkness, same bread, same salt, same sky. The night deepens as you walk away from the terraces of the wealthy. The air cools, the scent of roasted lamb, replaced by the sharper tang of smoke and clay. You follow the flicker of torches toward the outskirts of the village, toward a sound that doesn't quite belong to rest. A low chant hums through the night, punctuated by the crackle of fire. You come upon a small open space bordered by rough stones. At its center stands an altar blackened by years of heat. Around it, villagers have gathered again, not to eat this time, but to give thanks, to remember, to hope. You recognize faces from the morning meal, from the fields, even the priest from the earlier courtyard. This time, though, no polished bronze or perfumed oil, just smoke, ash, and bones. A woman steps forward carrying a basket covered with cloth. When she lifts it, you see a pair of doves inside their feathers trembling. She hands the basket to the priest, who nods solemnly. The villagers fall silent as he raises a blade carved from bronze. Mainstream fact animal offerings were central to Iron Age religion, but they weren't always grand sacrifices. Doves and pigeons were commonly offered by poorer families, symbols of purity devotion, or requests for forgiveness. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of small bone fragments in domestic altars, proof that worship often took place at home, not just in temples. The priest murmurs a blessing swift and soft. The knife flashes once. The dove's wings fall still. The villagers bow their heads not in fear, but in resignation, the quiet understanding that life feeds life. The priest lays the small bodies on the altar and sprinkles a handful of barley over them. A woman nearby hums a single low note that seems to rise straight into the firelight. You inhale. The scent is thick, burning grain blood and olive oil. Not pleasant, but not cruel either. Just ancient, necessary. Quirky tidbit. Some evidence suggests that early Judeans used certain aromatic plants like juniper or cedar chips to mask the smell of burning flesh during sacrifices. You catch that faint woody scent now curling through the smoke like an invisible prayer. The priest stirs the coals with an iron rod. Sparks leap upward, tiny constellations in the dark. He mutters something you can barely hear, ash to earth, breath to sky. Historians still argue whether such sacrifices were meant as literal offerings to God or as communal rituals of renewal, a way to cleanse collective fear and begin again. Maybe both, maybe neither. The truth, like the smoke, is impossible to hold. Beside you, a young shepherd presses something into your hand, a small bone smooth and white. For protection, he whispers. From jackals, from storms. You stare at it, unsure whether to feel honored or unsettled. The boy smiles. Don't worry, it's lucky. You tuck the bone into your belt and glance back at the fire. The priest has placed the remains of the doves on the outer stones, now alongside other bones, charred black. A faint circle of ash surrounds the altar, years of repetition layered into the earth itself. You wonder how many prayers lie buried here, each one a whisper to the stars. Mainstream fact excavation of village shrines often reveals precisely this: rings of ash bone and pottery sherds reused as ritual objects. Some pits contain remains of goats or birds, others just burned grain. Archaeologists interpret them as household altars, personal acts of faith among the noise of daily life. The woman who hummed earlier begins another song, slow and mournful. A child joins in her small voice, pure and steady. The tune rises and falls like breath. You feel your pulse sync with it, slow and deep. Then, something shifts. A man steps forward, carrying a clay bowl, inside fragments of animal bone, bits of blackened bread, a few drops of wine. He kneels beside the altar and begins to bury the mixture under the stones. A closing gesture, returning to the earth what the fire could not consume. Historians still debate whether such rituals had agricultural meanings, sowing blessings into the ground, or purely spiritual ones. Either way, it's an act of return. Ash to soil, hope to future. You watch as the priest smears a thin line of ash across his forehead. The others follow, marking themselves silently. When the bowl of ashes reaches you, you hesitate, then dip a finger in and touch your brow. The texture is fine like flour. The smell is faintly sweet. For a heartbeat, you feel anchored, connected to something both primal and peaceful. Quirky tidbit: in some early Judean sites, archaeologists have discovered residue from what appears to be honey mixed into sacrificial ash, possibly symbolic of sweetness offered to offset bitterness. You imagine that same honey, now invisible, but present, folded into the night air. The flames flicker lower. The villagers begin to disperse, some laughing softly, now others wiping their faces. Children chase each other around the dying fire, their joy as much a prayer as anything spoken. You sit on a nearby rock, staring at the smoke rising upward until it vanishes into the stars. You think of the wealthy man's courtyard, the priest's offerings, the workers' lentils, and realize this too is part of the same story. From feast to famine, from silver to sweat, every table leads back to the same altar, to the moment when something living becomes memory. A stray dog wanders in, sniffing at the stones. The priest tosses it a bone, murmuring, "Nothing wasted." You smile, because that somehow feels holy. The fire is almost gone now. The ashes glow faintly like the embers of 1,000 shared meals, 1,000 whispered hopes. You close your eyes. For a moment, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the earth itself, slow, steady, unending. Then the wind rises, carrying away the last thread of smoke. The altar cools. The stars above shimmer like spilled salt. And you know deep down that tomorrow, when dawn comes and bread bakes again, the cycle will begin anew. Life feeding life, dust feeding dust, until even memory tastes of ash and grace. The next morning comes quietly, the village still wrapped in a hush of pale gold. Smoke curls lazily from the ovens, as if the night's ashes have simply changed shape. You follow the scent of baking warm, nutty familiar, and soon find yourself at the communal ovens where a group of women are already at work. Their sleeves are rolled high, forearms dusted with flour, faces shining with sweat and focus. They move with purpose, each motion a rhythm you could almost fall asleep, to the slap of dough against stone, the scrape of coals, the low murmur of gossip. The air is thick with heat and yeast. You lean against the wall, watching. One woman notices and waves a wooden paddle in mock warning. "If you're not kneading, you're in the way," she says. The others laugh, a sound richer than music. You step forward, grin, and ask, "Teach me." Then she shrugs. Your arms will regret it, but your stomach won't. She hands you a lump of dough, sticky and cool. It yields beneath your fingers like memory itself. Mainstream fact: women in Iron Age Judea were the primary food producers within the home. Archaeologists have found grinding stones, baking ovens, and storage jars concentrated in domestic quarters, proof that daily bread making wasn't just survival, but the core of community life. You push your palms into the dough, folding, turning, pressing again. The rhythm catches you. One woman hums an old melody, something about harvest and rain, and the others join softly. You match your movements to the beat, your hands sinking deeper with each note. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that songs like these weren't just for company, they helped keep the rhythm steady for kneading and grinding, almost like ancient work playlists. In some ruins, fragments of lyrics even appear scratched onto pottery shards, hints of women's voices echoing across millennia. The dough warms quickly under your hands. You flatten it, shape it, dust it with coarse flour. A younger woman slides it into the clay oven's mouth, tucking it beside other loaves already puffing and golden. The heat rushes out in a wave stealing your breath. You step back laughing, and she grins. First-timers always flinch. You glance around the courtyard. A child sits nearby fanning the fire with a palm frond. Another woman balances a jar on her hip, humming as she stirs oil and herbs in a small bowl. Olive branches crackle softly in the oven. The smell is heavenly. Historians still argue whether these communal ovens were shared between families or managed by households in turns. But the evidence, clusters of ovens near multiple homes, suggests that baking was never solitary. It was labor, yes, but also ritual gathering and storytelling. Tell me, you ask, still watching the bread rise, how do you know when it's ready? The eldest woman doesn't look up. She simply says, "The bread will tell you." Then she adds, after a pause, "If you listen." You listen. The oven crackles. Somewhere a rooster complains. The dough hisses faintly as it releases steam. You realize she's right. The bread speaks in scent and sound long before it browns. She pulls a loaf from the oven with her bare hands, flipping it onto a woven mat. Steam curls upward, sweet and alive. She tears it in half and hands you a piece. The crust shatters. The inside is soft and fragrant. You take a bite. The taste is deep, smoky, and alive with the faint tang of the clay oven. You close your eyes. She chuckles. "See, you're listening now." You nod. "It's the best thing I've ever eaten." "Of course it is," she says. "It's work turned into food." You look at their faces lined, sun-darkened calm. Each woman here has likely baked 1,000 loaves, each one slightly different, but born of the same earth, the same hands. You suddenly understand what the archaeologists mean when they talk about cultural continuity. It's not words or monuments that last. It's gestures, repetition, the sound of someone kneading dough exactly as their mother did. Mainstream. Fact. The round, flat bread typical of Iron Age Judea, sometimes called uga or challah in later Hebrew, was both daily sustenance and sacred offering. Bread accompanied every ritual, every meal, every covenant. It wasn't just food, it was theology in edible form. A girl no older than 10 carries over a small clay cup of oil mixed with crushed herbs. She brushes it onto the hot loaves, the oil sizzling as it meets the crust. The smell blooms again, wild thyme, sesame, and something sharp, like vinegar. Quirky tidbit ancient recipes for flavored oils used wild herbs and even bits of ground pomegranate peel, not just for taste, but as natural preservatives. The women knew chemistry long before chemistry had a name. One of them turns to you, eyes twinkling. "You bake like a foreigner," she teases. You raise an eyebrow. How do foreigners bake? With too much thought and not enough patience. Everyone laughs again. The bread breaks. Conversation flows. Someone mentions the harvest. Another wonders aloud whether the rains will come early. Beneath the laughter, you feel the hum of quiet worry, the kind every society carries when survival depends on the sky. The eldest woman touches the wall of the oven, murmuring something you don't quite catch. A prayer, maybe. She looks at you and smiles faintly. "If the bread burns, it's not the oven's fault," she says. "It's the baker's heart." You don't know if she means it literally or not, but either way, you store the line somewhere deep. Historians still debate the role of women in ancient religion, but here it's obvious. Their ovens were altars, their loaves offerings. Each meal was a small act of devotion to family, to earth, to endurance itself. The bread cools, the chatter softens. The women begin to clean the work table, sweeping stray flour into a basket for reuse. Nothing wasted. One presses a still warm loaf into your hands. "Take it," she says. "You'll get hungry again." You smile, thanking her. The loaf feels alive, soft breathing heat into your palms. As you walk away, the rhythmic sounds fade behind you. The scent lingers, though, clinging to your hair and clothes, a mixture of flower smoke and something you can only describe as continuity. You break off a small piece and taste it again, slower this time. It tastes like time itself, endless, ordinary, and perfect. By the time the sun lifts higher, the village is awake and pulsing with quiet energy. Chickens scatter underfoot. The hammer of a blacksmith clinks somewhere beyond the hill. You follow the narrow dirt lane that curls between mud brick walls, your shadow bending with each turn. The bread from earlier still sits warm in your hand, but now your curiosity turns towards something else: salt. Salt seems ordinary, but in ancient Judea it wasn't. It was power, purity, and preservation in one crystalline form. You walk until you reach the edge of the settlement, where a group of men load baskets of grayish-white chunks onto donkeys. Each crystal gleams faintly under the morning light, like dull glass. Mainstream fact: the salt used in Iron Age Judea came primarily from the Dead Sea region, one of the richest natural sources in the world. It was scraped from the shores or traded through caravan routes stretching deep into the desert. Salt was so essential that it even became a metaphor for loyalty, the salt of the covenant. You crouch beside one of the baskets and pick up a lump. It's not as white as modern table salt, more beige-veined and gritty. You taste a pinch and instantly regret it. "Ugh," you mutter, coughing. The nearest trader laughs, slapping his knee. "That's real salt," he says, "not the kind you rich city types sprinkle on fancy fish." You smile, your mouth still burning. "So this is what they used to preserve meat and flavor bread," he nods. "Without it, we'd starve by winter." Then, lowering his voice, he adds, "Or worse, have bland stew." You laugh, and he grins wide enough to show the missing tooth he's probably proud of. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists once found a whole block of compacted salt inside a broken jar at a dig site near Beersheba. At first, they thought it was limestone, but chemical testing proved otherwise. It had survived 700 years, still crystalline. Imagine a seasoning that outlives entire empires. The trader gestures to the donkeys. "These are bound for Jerusalem priests, soldiers, bakers. Everyone needs salt. You look out toward the distant hills, picturing caravans snaking through dry ravines, sacks of salt swaying with each step. In a world without refrigerators, salt was time made solid, stretching the life of meat, fish, and even cheese beyond their natural limits. Historians still argue whether salt was taxed or temple-controlled in Judea. Some claim the state monopolized it. Others believe it flowed freely through local markets. Either way, salt meant stability, and wherever it was scarce, chaos followed. You follow the traders' group for a while. The smell of donkey sweat mingling with the dry, mineral tang of salt. The road hums with quiet conversation, complaints about cracked hooves, jokes about lazy apprentices, worries about bandits lurking near the wadis. One man pulls a leather pouch from his belt and offers you a handful of dried lentils. "Breakfast of kings," he says with mock pride. You pop one into your mouth. It's hard as a pebble. You pretend to enjoy it. "Delicious," you say, nodding gravely. He laughs. You chew like a foreigner. That phrase again. You've heard it twice now. Maybe it means you think too much about what you eat. Maybe it just means you're new here. You glance at the horizon. Beyond the olive groves, the land dips toward a shimmering expanse of pale blue, the Dead Sea. The heat rising from it blurs the line between earth and sky. You imagine workers hacking at salt crusts with iron chisels, their skin burning from the sting of mineral dust, their clothes stiff with crystals. Mainstream. Fact. The phrase covenant of salt appears multiple times in the Hebrew Bible. Salt symbolized permanence, incorruptibility. Once mixed into a covenant offering, it made the promise unbreakable, as enduring as the mineral itself. You pause by a small shrine built of uncut stones. Someone has placed a pinch of salt on its ledge beside a wilted sprig of thyme. A humble offering, maybe, for safe travel. You can't help but think how many times salt has stood in for faith, for trust, for gratitude. Quirky tidbit: some superstitions claimed that spilling salt invited bad luck even in the ancient Near East. People might throw a few grains over their shoulder to ward off evil spirits, an early ancestor of the same ritual that somehow survived into modern kitchens. You scoop a little from your pouch and mimic the motion, tossing it behind you. The trader eyes you curiously. "Who taught you that?" You shrug. "Habit." He grins. "Then may your journey stay unspoiled." The road curves toward a low ridge. A group of women passes in the opposite direction, carrying baskets of lentils balanced on their heads. The rhythm of the village continues. Harvest, grind, bake trade repeat. Historians still argue whether the Dead Sea region was directly under Judean control or shared with nomadic tribes who taxed salt exports. The debate lingers in journals and excavation reports, each scholar sure they've solved the puzzle. But here, watching the traders, you realize maybe both were true. Salt belonged to whoever could survive its making. You step off the road, watching one of the donkeys shake itself free of flies. The crystals in the basket sparkle faintly as sunlight catches them. There's something anciently beautiful about it, the way salt reflects light, even as it absorbs sweat. You remember a line from somewhere: "You are the salt of the earth." It makes sense now. To be salt is to preserve what matters, to endure, to make everything else taste like life. You take one last look at the salt piles before heading back toward the village. The traders shout farewell, voices echoing off the stone walls. You wave, and the taste of brine still lingers on your lips, sharp grounding eternal. By midday, the sun has claimed the sky like a tyrant, and everything shimmers under its rule. Even the shadows seem tired. You find yourself drawn toward the edge of the settlement, where a cluster of low tents flutters lazily in the breeze. The smell here is different, spiced, smoky, and faintly metallic. Someone's cooking stew, and your stomach, ever faithful, demands investigation. You duck beneath a tattered awning and find an older man crouched over a clay pot suspended above glowing coals. He looks up, squints, and then waves you closer with the familiarity of someone who doesn't need to know your name to feed you. "Sit," he says, stirring the pot. You look like a man who's forgotten lunch exists. He's right. You sit cross-legged in the dust watching as he lifts the lid. Steam bursts upward, carrying a fragrance both earthy and rich. Lentils, onions, maybe a trace of garlic. Mainstream fact: lentils were one of the most common legumes in Iron Age Judea, a daily staple across classes. Archaeological residues of lentil starch have been found in cooking pots and grinding stones, confirming their ubiquity in household diets. You lean closer. The lentils swirl in a thick brownish broth. "Smells incredible," you say. The old man grins. "Smells like survival." He ladles some into a small clay bowl, then tears a piece of flatbread and dips it, letting it soak before eating. Here he adds, handing you another piece. "Try before it cools." You obey, scooping a bite. The texture is soft, almost creamy, with just enough salt to remind you of the trader's baskets. The taste, simple, earthy, grounding. It's not fancy, it's home. You chew slowly, the kind of chewing that feels meditative. "What's in it?" you ask. He counts on his fingers. "Lentils, onions, a handful of barley, if I'm lucky. Oil, salt, and a prayer." You raise an eyebrow. "What kind of prayer?" "The kind that keeps the fire burning," he says, then chuckles. "Or maybe keeps the lentils from turning to stone." You both laugh. Quirky tidbit: in some texts, lentils were associated with mourning, the round shape symbolizing the cycle of life and death. Even today, Jewish tradition includes lentils at funerals, echoing customs that may stretch back thousands of years. Food as memory, meal as metaphor. The man adjusts a small clay lid and glances toward the horizon. "They say Jacob traded his birthright for a bowl of lentils," he mutters. You'd think it must have been a fine stew. You grin. Or maybe he was just very hungry. Maybe the man says, eyes twinkling. But hunger makes prophets and fools alike. He tosses a few twigs into the coals, stirring up a burst of sparks. The pot bubbles louder, like it's laughing along. Historians still argue whether lentils were cultivated in pure domestic plots or grown in rotation with barley to preserve soil fertility. Some evidence from pollen studies suggests that Judean farmers practiced surprisingly advanced crop management for their time, adjusting cycles to stretch yield and water. You glance around his small camp: 2 clay jars, a woven mat, a sleeping roll. Minimalist living before it became fashionable. "You live alone?" you ask. He shrugs. "Alone enough. My wife passed 2 harvests ago. My sons trade salt near the Dead Sea. They send me herbs sometimes." He gestures at a small bundle tied with reed string. "Thyme, cumin, coriander. A man could live on those and memories." The words sit heavy in the heat, but his voice carries no sadness, just acceptance, slow and sure. He ladles more stew into your bowl. Eat. You'll need strength if you're walking to the hills. You nod, though you're not sure where you're headed. You take another bite, the lentils softening further as they cool. The taste now feels even richer. Maybe because you're starting to understand how much meaning can live inside something so humble. Mainstream, fact-cooking vessels in Iron Age Judea were designed for efficiency, rounded bottoms, for even heat-wide mouths for stirring. Pottery analysis even reveals scorch marks consistent with stew-based diets, proving how central lentil and barley dishes were. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. So this stew could be 2,000 years old, you say. He laughs a low rumble. Older. We just keep adding to the same pot. You both smile, but part of you wonders if that's more truth than joke. He leans back, staring at the shimmering air. You know he says there's an old saying, salt preserves food, but lentils preserve people. You tilt your head. How so? Salt keeps the body alive, he explains, but lentils keep the body moving. Without them, no farmer tills, no soldier fights, no mother nurses. Salt lasts, but lentils sustain. You nod slowly, feeling the weight of it. Historians still debate the role of legumes in ancient trade economies. Were they just local staples or part of broader agricultural exports? Evidence from storage jars in Judean fortresses suggests both. Lentils might not sparkle like salt, but they built civilizations one spoonful at a time. The stew bubbles quieter now, thicker, darker. The man adds a dash of oil from a small flask and stirs. The smell deepens, filling the tent like incense. Quirky tidbit. Early Jewish dietary laws, later codified in biblical texts, likely grew from practical origins. Mixing dairy and meat, for instance, spoiled quickly in desert heat. Lentils, plant-based and easy to store, were a perfect solution for both diet and ritual. You finish the last bite and set down your bowl. That was incredible, you say. He nods, wiping his hands on his robe. Food should never be incredible, he says softly. It should be inevitable. You smile. Then you're doing it right. The old man looks out at the sunlight, which has now turned almost white in its intensity. There's a well not far from here, he says. You'll need water. You rise, stretch, and thank him again. He waves it off. If you ever come back, bring stories. I'll trade you a bowl for a tale. Deal, you say, and mean it. You step back into the heat, carrying the taste of lentils on your tongue and the echo of his words in your mind. You don't know what you'll find next, but somehow you already feel full. You leave the stew behind, but carry its warmth with you, a lingering comfort in your belly and your mind. The afternoon light has softened a little, brushing the hills in bronze instead of white fire. You follow the dirt path, uphill, until you reach a small terrace overlooking the valley. From here, the land unfolds like a woven cloth, patches of barley, olive trees, and far below, the clustered rooftops of the village you've just left behind. A breeze rises, dry but kind. You sit down on a low stone wall, unwrapping the small loaf of bread you'd been given earlier. It's still faintly warm, and when you tear it open, the smell reminds you of the women at the oven, their laughter, their flour-dusted hands. You take a bite and let your mind drift. Somewhere behind you, a shepherd whistles the faint bleating of goats blending into the hum of insects. You feel the day slowing. Mainstream fact terraces, like the one you're sitting on, were vital to agriculture in Iron Age Judea. Farmers built these by hand stacking stones into retaining walls that captured soil and slowed erosion. Without terraces, the steep hillsides would have bled away every rainy season. You run your fingers over the stones, rough, ancient, stubborn, each one placed by someone who likely never imagined strangers would touch them thousands of years later. You imagine those hands, brown, calloused, confident, stacking rock after rock under the same sun you sit beneath now. Looks like you found the best seat in Judea, a voice says behind you. You turn. A young shepherd stands there, a crooked staff in one hand, a pouch slung over his shoulder. His smile is easy, his eyes sunlit. Mind if I join you? He asks. Not at all, you say, motioning to the wall. He sits setting down his pouch. You're not from here, he says, though it sounds more like an observation than a question. You chuckle. Is it that obvious? Only people from far away stare at rocks, like they're miracles, he says, grinning. You laugh. Maybe they are. He shrugs. Maybe. My father says each one's a sermon about patience. You break off a piece of bread and hand it to him. Then we should listen together. He accepts it with a nod and takes a bite, chewing thoughtfully. Not bad, he says. Bit dry. Needs oil. You grin. Always the critic. He smirks. Always hungry. The two of you eat in companionable silence for a while. Below the olive trees shimmer faintly their leaves, catching the sun like tiny mirrors. The shepherd finally speaks again. My flock grazes near the next ridge, he says. If you want to see something worth staring at, come when the sun sets. You follow him without hesitation. As you walk, the smell of dust and time rises with every step. The goats move like restless clouds ahead of you, bells tinkling softly. You find comfort in the rhythm. The crunch of sandals on gravel, the occasional bleat, the sigh of wind. Mainstream, fact, pastoral life in Iron Age Judea was semi-nomadic. Shepherds often lived between permanent villages and temporary camps, guiding flocks along seasonal routes. Their mobility made them both vital and marginal independent, yet tied to the rhythms of farmers and traders. You reach the ridge, just as the light begins to tilt toward gold. The valley below glows as though the earth itself were breathing. The shepherd gestures to a circle of stones near his campfire. Sit, he says. You might as well enjoy the show. The show, as it turns out, is the sky. As the sun dips lower, colors unfold in slow motion, amber melting into rose, rose, fading into violet. The goats settle their silhouettes small against the widening dusk. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient shepherds, according to rabbinic lore, used flutes made from reeds or bird bones to pass the time and to soothe both themselves and their animals. In one Judean cave, archaeologists found fragments of such a flute, still capable of producing a faint, haunting tone after restoration. The young man pulls a small pipe from his pouch and begins to play. The sound is thin, but tender, rising like smoke. You close your eyes, feeling it slip through you, notes as ancient as the terraces as soft as the fading light. When the song ends, you clap softly. Beautiful, you say. He shrugs modestly. It's just air through a bone. The hard part's the silence afterward. You both smile. Historians still argue whether shepherds in Judea were as poor as later texts suggest, or whether their mobility gave them unique wealth measured not in coin, but in freedom. Either way, they lived on the frontier of ordinary life, halfway between solitude and civilization. You watch him gather a few sticks, lighting a small fire. The first sparks catch, and soon a steady flame licks upward, painting both your faces in amber. The goats are quiet now, the valley darkening below. He opens a small clay jar and offers it to you. Inside is thick, golden liquid olive oil. For the bread, he says simply. You dip your piece, the oil warm from the day's heat, and taste it. Smooth, peppery, alive. Mainstream fact olive oil was central to daily life in ancient Judea, not just for food, but for lighting lamps, anointing skin, even as currency. Pressing season was both economic event and spiritual festival. The shepherd adds softly, we call it liquid light. Without it, the nights would be darker than death. You take another bite. He's right. The oil glows faintly even in the firelight, like sunlight trapped in liquid form. Quirky tidbit residue analysis from ancient lamps shows traces of herbs mixed into oil, perhaps for fragrance or symbolic meaning. Imagine a lamp burning with hints of myrtle, rosemary, and frankincense scenting the darkness. The shepherd stretches out on the ground arms behind his head. You ever wonder? He says if the stars are just holes in the roof of heaven where the light leaks through. You smile. Only every night. He laughs quietly. Then we're both dreamers. You lean back watching as the first stars appear sharp, countless, eternal. The fire crackles, the goats breathe softly, and for a moment, the world feels perfectly still. Historians still argue whether shepherds contributed to the oral traditions that shaped later scriptures. Maybe they did. After all, who else spent so many nights alone beneath that kind of silence? You glance at the shepherd. His eyes are half closed, reflecting firelight. You'll sleep well tonight, you say. He murmurs, always do. The sky sings if you listen. You nod your own eyelids heavy now. The last thing you hear, before sleep steals you, is the faint melody of his flute. Again, thin, ancient, and eternal. When you wake, dawn is barely stirring. The world lies painted in shades of blue and gray. Everything hushed, as if afraid to break the spell of the night's last breath. The shepherd is gone, but the embers of the fire still smolder, faintly sighing each time the wind passes through. You stretch, bones creaking, mouth dry, and the first thing that greets you is the faint, unmistakable scent of oil and bread clinging to your fingers. You sit up slowly, watching the sun's edge rise behind the far hills. It's a small, golden blade, at first slicing open the darkness. Then, with a steady breath, the light spills over the land. The olive groves shimmer like waves. The terraces below flicker awake. You can almost hear the world exhale. You reach for the last crust of bread from last night, dipping it into the oil jar the shepherd left beside the stones. It's cold now, thickened, but still alive with flavor, bitter and deep. Mainstream fact: olive oil production in Iron Age Judea was both a household and industrial enterprise. Archaeologists have uncovered massive stone presses with twin beams and collection vats, proof that oil wasn't just for local use, it was exported across the Levant, even to Egypt. You imagine those presses, stone basins dark with residue workers, shouting over the grind of wood, the sweet perfume of crushed olives rising in waves. Oil was wealth, light medicine, and memory all at once. As you make your way downhill, you hear the rhythmic thud of something heavy. Following the sound, you find a group of men operating an ancient oil press. Two stand at the beam's end, walking in slow circles to crush the olives beneath a round stone. Another kneels by the vat, scooping pale green liquid into clay jars. The foreman looks up and waves. "You there, grab the sieve." You hesitate, and he grins. "Don't worry, you won't break it. Much." You take the woven sieve from a bench and hold it steady as he pours a bucket of oil through. It gleams in the sun, like molten glass shimmering gold green. "Not bad for this year," he says, watching it flow. The rain came early. You nod, though your arms already ache from holding steady. "How much oil do you get from all this?" He shrugs. "Depends on the olives. A strong harvest might yield 10 jars from one press. If the gods are bored, maybe 5. You smile. "And what happens if they're angry?" He grins. "Then we drink water." The men laugh, and the press continues its slow, steady rhythm. You realize how much of life here is about patience, waiting for rain, waiting for bread to rise, waiting for the oil to drip clean. Quirky tidbit residue. Testing on ancient oil jars shows that some batches contained trace elements of pistachio and sesame oils, perhaps experimental blends or early perfumes. Someone somewhere was already trying to invent the Iron Age version of extra virgin infused with herbs. The foreman dips his finger into the oil and tastes it. "Too sharp," he mutters. "Needs time to rest." Then glancing at you, he says, "Everything worth tasting does." You nod, remembering the lentils, the bread, even the salt. Time, it's the invisible ingredient in everything. Historians still argue whether olive oil was primarily traded as currency or consumed locally. Some suggest temple monopolies controlled the best stock, reserving pure oil for lamps and ritual anointing. Others believe the economy was more decentralized, with family presses feeding both village markets and caravans. You watch as a young worker seals the jars with clay and straw, marking each with a small line scratched by a reed stylus. Ownership, accountability, memory, all reduced to one crude symbol. When the work slows, the foreman hands you a small cup of freshly pressed oil mixed with herbs. "For the road," he says, "drink." You hesitate. "Straight." He laughs. "You think we have wine?" You take a cautious sip. It's bitter at first, then grassy, almost electric on your tongue. It burns slightly as it goes down. "Tastes alive," you say, wincing. "That's how you know it's good," he says proudly. "If it doesn't bite, it's dead." The others laugh again, and for a moment you feel like part of their rhythm. Sun sweat, laughter oil. Quirky tidbit oil wasn't only for food. In tombs across Judea, archaeologists have found small alabaster flasks once filled with perfumed oil, used for anointing the dead. Even in death, people sought light and scent. The foreman wipes his hands on his tunic. "You heading east?" he asks. "Toward the Dead Sea," you reply. He nods. "Be careful near the wadis. The ground there eats feet." You laugh. "Good to know." He pauses, studying you. "You're not like most travelers," he says. "You listen, trying to you admit." He grins. "Then you'll do fine." The land talks. Most people just shout over it. You thank him, wave to the workers, and start down the slope again. The air thickens with heat, but your steps feel lighter. Your hands slick with oil. You rub your palms together, letting the scent rise, sharp, green, luminous. Mainstream. Fact: olive trees can live for centuries. Some groves in Israel and Palestine today may trace their roots literally to Iron Age plantings. The same trees that once fed your imaginary village could still stand older than most nations. You stop beneath a particularly gnarled trunk, its bark twisted like woven rope. You rest your hand on it, feeling the cool pulse of ancient life. You remember, don't you? You whisper. The wind stirs, soft and slow, as if in answer. Historians still debate how much of the biblical symbolism around oil light anointing holiness emerged from agricultural necessity or spiritual intuition. Maybe both. Maybe the farmers who pressed olives by day simply looked at the golden liquid and thought, "This must be what divinity feels like when it flows." The sun climbs higher, the scent of oil thickening in the air. You stand there for a while longer, breathing it in until the hum of cicadas grows too loud to ignore. Then you shoulder your pack, take one last look at the shining terraces below, and walk toward the horizon, toward more dust, more stories, and maybe, just maybe, more light. By midday, the road narrows into a ribbon of stone and scrub. You follow its curve past the olive groves until the air turns dry and salted. The faint taste of the Dead Sea rides on the breeze before you even see it, an invisible ocean hanging in the air. When you finally crest the ridge, it sprawls beneath you, a mirror the color of pewter, utterly still framed by canyons that crumble like burnt bread. No waves, no gulls, no mercy. Just silence, sun and salt. You pause to take it in. "You probably won't survive this," you whisper, half joking, half serious. Not that anyone could float, yes. Live, no. The valley feels haunted by something old and watchful. You descend slowly, your sandals crunching over salt crystals that glint like broken glass. Here, nothing grows. No fig, no vine, no wildflower. Yet somehow, people still come. They always do. Mainstream. Fact: archaeological digs around the Dead Sea reveal evidence of salt harvesting as early as the Iron Age. Blocks of salt were quarried, traded, and taxed, a commodity so valuable it shaped economies. You are the salt of the earth, the saying goes, but here it's literal. You spot a small camp near the water's edge, a makeshift shelter of reeds and animal skins. Two men crouch by a pile of crystallized slabs, hammering them apart with iron chisels. The blows echo across the flats like dull bells. One of them looks up. "Traveler," he calls, "come share the shade." You hesitate, then approach. The shade is more symbolic than real. but the gesture counts. He pours you a small cup of brackish water from a goatskin flask. You try not to grimace as it slides down your throat like liquid metal. So the man says, wiping sweat from his face, "You've come for salt or stories?" You grin. "Stories mostly." He laughs. "Good. Salt spoils, but stories grow. They work methodically, prying chunks from a crust that looks like frozen foam." "The sea gives and takes," the other man says. "Sometimes she leaves treasure. Sometimes she swallows it." "Treasure, you ask?" He nods toward the far shore. "There are ruins under there. The old towns. People say if you dive, you can still hear the market bells." You chuckle. "If you dive, you'll drown in syrup." He grins. "Then the bells will ring louder." Quirky tidbit: in the early 20th century, archaeologists did recover remnants of ancient reed baskets filled with hardened salt beneath Dead Sea sediment, proof that Iron Age people literally stored salt like gold. You kneel to touch the ground. It crunches beneath your fingers, rough and granular. The crystals are irregular white, with hints of pink. You taste a grain, and your tongue immediately regrets the decision. The men laugh. "You'll remember that one," the first says. Historians still argue whether the so-called salt trade road that linked Judea to Moab and Edom was a major economic artery or a local route. Some scholars claim caravans carried salt to Jerusalem for temple rituals. Others suggest most was used for preserving food in desert outposts. Either way, it was life distilled into a mineral. As you sit watching them work, you notice how the light shifts, brighter, sharper, almost blinding. It feels less like day and more like standing inside a mirror. You squint at the horizon and see small figures, moving traders, maybe they're donkeys, burdened with clay jars. The older salt worker gestures toward them. That's the last caravan before sunset. They'll head north to Jericho, sell what they can, and be ghosts by morning. You nod. "Do they ever rest?" He shrugs. "Not while people eat." You grin. "Fair. You stay a while longer listening to their talk. They joke about camels with bad tempers, about merchants who water down their salt for profit. One even swears his cousin once found a fish fossilized whole in a salt block proof. He says that the sea eats what it wants and spits out what it doesn't. You smile, filing that image away. A fish suspended forever in mineral, like a memory you can touch. Quirky tidbit: the Hebrew Bible mentions covenants of salt agreements sealed with the sharing of salt to symbolize permanence and preservation. To break such a covenant was unthinkable, like trying to unseason a meal already cooked. You pick up a handful of crystals, let them pour through your fingers. Strange, you say, how something that burns the tongue could also keep things from rotting. The old man nods. Everything good hurts a little. Historians still debate whether the pillar of salt from the story of Lot's wife was a natural salt formation or a symbolic warning. Either way, it looms in local memory as a monument to hesitation, the cost of looking back when life demands you move forward. As the day fades, you walk closer to the sea's edge. The air thickens with the scent of minerals and metal. The surface looks calm, but beneath you sense heaviness, a pull. You crouch and dip your hand in. It's warm, almost oily, coating your skin with invisible residue. You whisper, "The world was salt before it was sweet." Your reflection stares back, shimmering, distorted. For a moment, it looks ancient, as if every story you've heard has etched itself into your face. Behind you, the workers are packing up their laughter, drifting like dry wind. Traveler one calls, "Take a piece with you, for luck." He tosses a small crystal block your way. You catch it, the sunlight refracting inside like a frozen flame. "For the road," he says, "and for remembering." You nod, tucking it into your satchel beside the last crumbs of bread. "Thanks," you say softly. As the sun bleeds red into the horizon, you start the long walk back toward the hills. Each step crunches. Each breath tastes faintly of forever. By nightfall, the desert has cooled to a hush. The wind moves softly through the wadis, carrying with it a whisper of salt and dust. You find a hollow between the rocks and settle down, wrapping your cloak tighter against the chill. Overhead, the stars bloom like 1,000 oil lamps lit by unseen hands. The silence feels ancient, as if the land itself has stopped to listen. You pull from your satchel the small salt crystal the worker gave you. It glimmers faintly in the starlight, cold and clear, like a memory solidified. You set it beside you on the sand. Then you break the last piece of bread in half, dip it in the remaining oil, and eat slowly, tasting all that's come before grain olive, earth, and sweat. The flavors are simple, yet together they tell a story older than any empire. Mainstream fact, bread, oil, and salt weren't just staples, they were symbols of covenant and community. Archaeologists often find all three together in household shrines, suggesting that meals weren't purely practical, but sacred moments of gratitude. You chew thoughtfully, eyes drifting toward the sky. Somewhere out there, people have long since replaced stone ovens with steel and oil lamps with electricity. Yet something deep in you still resonates with this simplicity, the feeling of earning warmth, of feeding hunger directly from the land's hand. Quirky tidbit: in certain Judean burials, traces of salt have been found lining the interior of tombs as if to protect the body from corruption. Some scholars think it was symbolic purification. Others think it was just good chemistry. Either way, even in death, salt kept vigil. You lie back against the sand and exhale. The stars seem impossibly close now, glittering on the surface of your eyes. The desert smells faintly of ash and thyme carried from some unseen campfire far away. Historians still argue whether everyday Iron Age life was harsh beyond endurance or quietly fulfilling. Were people miserable serfs scraping by, or content villagers whose rhythm matched the earth's? Perhaps both. Survival and serenity aren't opposites here. They're twins sharing the same clay bowl. You imagine the people you've met along this journey, the baker wiping flour from his hands, the woman stirring lentils by the hearth, the shepherd humming to his goats, the olive press foreman squinting into sunlight, and the salt worker laughing by the Dead Sea. None of them knew they'd end up as archaeological context. They simply lived one meal at a time, each bite tethering them to tomorrow. You reach into your pouch and scatter a few crumbs on the ground. For the spirits, you whisper half a joke, half a prayer. A small beetle emerges from the shadows, investigating. You smile. Guess that counts. The stars pulse brighter, as if approving. Mainstream fact, Many ancient Judeans believed the wilderness was where divine messages were clearest away from noise near the bones of the world. Prophets retreated here not to escape, but to listen. Maybe that's what you've been doing all along. You close your eyes, and the images swirl fields of barley, waving gold ovens glowing at dusk. Olive oil spilling like honey salt, shining like frost. The daily table of Iron Age Judea unfolds one last time, an offering to memory. The wind murmurs across the dunes, gathering all these sounds, the kneading, the pressing, the grinding, the laughter, and blending them into a single, endless breath. You let yourself drift with it. Your breathing slows. The stars soften. The land begins to fade around the edges, its details dissolving like salt in warm water. The world feels quiet now, safe in its stillness. The night doesn't ask for anything. No work, no words, no worry. It only asks that you rest. You feel your body sink deeper into the sand, supported and weightless at once. The warmth of the day lingers faintly mixing with the cool breath of night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, then falls silent. A single owl calls from the cliffs, the sound floating like a lullaby. The salt crystal beside you catches the last thread of starlight. It glows softly, steady, and pure. You think of everything it represents: preservation, endurance, connection. All the things that keep a life from slipping away. You remember the people whose hands shaped the bread, pressed the oil, carved the salt. They lived in rhythm with the same sun that will rise for you tomorrow. You inhale slowly, imagining the air filling your lungs with the scent of warm earth and olive wood. Every breath feels older, slower, deeper. You are no longer walking ancient roads. You are part of them, stone dust and quiet memory. So let it all settle now. The stories, the sounds, the day's small miracles. Let them fold around you like the softest cloak. The night is long but kind. The stars are patient. And somewhere, far below their shining gaze, you drift into stillness, peaceful, rooted, timeless. Good night, traveler.